And in some ways, like not having the price was like a way to like not distract from the games for like that core audience. Because people like me were gonna get the information anyway. And so you have this sort of wild mix of like games that are clearly in Nintendo's wheelhouse, getting kids excited, but then also like just like the mic drop of having Elden Ring on there and then Miyazaki's next game is something that really signals a shift in the way that they're going to position themselves as like, a place where you can play all the your favorite games, not just your favorite Nintendo games, not just like, like the easy place, but an all sort of all in one system where you can you can get a wide variety and wide range of games, not tackling Steam Deck entirely, but probably getting pretty close, I think.
Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm Jeremy,
I'm Alan.
and we want to welcome you back to GG Everybody, your ultimate pop culture podcast where we hit start on all things geek. From video games and comic books to tabletop RPGs, tech trends, and beyond, we're here to level up your fandom. Whether you're a console warrior, a dungeon master, or just someone who loves diving deep into geek culture, we've got something for you. Each episode, we tackle the biggest topics, hot takes, and hidden gems across your favorite fandoms. So grab your dice, charge your controllers, and get ready to geek out with our returning friend, Aidan Moher. Aidan, welcome back to the pod.
Hi, thanks as always for having me. It's always a blast.
Of course,
Our favorite comedian.
our favorite comedian. We're planning on having Greg Katzman come on, who is a senior publicity manager for IDW, and we are going to have him on. But given the state of the everything around us, we figured it would be better to have bring Aidan in to have a conversation about the Switch 2 and just what's been going on with the tariffs and trade wars and all that craziness. But before we do that, Aidan, I want you to plug your podcast because you've got something pretty cool happening right now. Can you tell us a little bit about the podcast that you recently rolled out?
Yeah, so since the last time I was on the show, my friend Ty Schalter and he's a fellow journalist and a longtime video game dude, launched a podcast called Fun Factor. It's the concept, the elevator pitch, as you will, is Ty and I, every episode, we dig out one of our old video game magazines from the 80s or the 90s. We read through, we do a flip through, and then we review the review at the end. And so we pick out it might be the first episode we did review of Final Fantasy VII. So went with a heavy hitter. We take a look at, how people were talking about and writing about video games back then. Do those reviews hold up? But then also it allows us to contextualize the things that, we were thinking about and talking about and experiencing as video game fans in the 90s. And how that shaped us as writers going forward. Why we are the way we are because of the video game magazines we were reading back in the day. So it's, a little trip down memory lane, but also our attempt at understanding why video games and games media have become what they've become. So it's a Fun Factor. It's at funfactorpod.com. We're on Blue Sky. We're on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, everywhere you can get podcasts, you can find us.
It's awesome. I had a chance to take a listen to the Final Fantasy VII episode, and it's awesome. I really enjoyed it. It definitely is definitely taps into that nostalgia factor, talking about some of the other reviews that are there, and also interestingly, like the looking back, I think at one point you mentioned how like the Final Fantasy VII review itself is like barely 300 words. Like it wasn't like a multi-page sprawled, like epic in the example that you had. And so it is really interesting to see like how certain games were spotlighted or not, how much attention was given. And, just those early days when, for example, the PlayStation library was like 40 games total, right? Like how do you build a top 10 out of 40 games?
On that episode, we look at issue number 1 of PSM. And so it launches and it has a Final Fantasy VII review as its sort of feature review. Like you say, it's about 300 words, so it's not a huge feature. But yeah, buried in the pages, we found like, their list of the top 25 PlayStation games of all time. But also, they had another section later in the magazine that's like reviews and review scores of every PlayStation game released. So they went back and like, this is what we would have given these games if we had reviewed them at the time. And there's like 67 games. So they've
Yeah.
made this like top 25 list out of like 67 total PlayStation games at the time.
And
And those are
re-reviewing
the sort
games
of
from like 2
nuggets where,
years ago. Yeah.
yeah,
That is wild.
isn't it wild? Yeah, it's just crazy. And just seeing the way that, you know, the console wars supported, single platform magazines, multiple magazines for single platforms, and how they were
Right.
sort of trying to like at the beginning of the lifespan of like the PlayStation, how were you mining content out of 67 games on the market? So it's a good trip down memory lane, seeing how all the different magazines approach these problems, these cultural moments differently. The first season that we're doing right now, we're looking specifically at that transitional period between the 16-bit era with the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, and the launch of the 32-bit era with the PlayStation and, well, I guess the 64-bit Nintendo 64, and looking at how dramatically and seismically the industry changed around that time.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
Um,
great podcast. I that you got a killer concept, like just to be able to kind of go back and look at how people were talking about all of these games compared to how they're those same games are talked about now.
yeah. Absolutely. It's a great kind of time capsule experiment, and whether you were alive and reading magazines at the time, or even if you're like a newer gamer and you're just coming up in a world where you always had access to IGN.com or Kotaku and these sorts of things, to be able to go back and see what games journalism looked like back then. It's really interesting. So yeah, plugging Fun Factor, definitely check it out. If you're listening to this, go give it a subscription. Go check it out. Leave them a review if you listen to it and you like it. And we'd also ask you to do the same thing for us as well. So if you're listening to this and you're enjoying us, please feel free to leave a review. It helps out podcast a lot when you do that. So awesome. Well, let's dive into it then, shall we? We in the last 2 weeks since our last episode had a couple just small, tiny, little important things happen in gaming. One of which being the we now live in a world where the Switch 2 is an actual, real, live, honest to goodness thing, and it had a price for a little bit, and it has a release date, which happens to be my 40th birthday. Thank you, Nintendo. So that all happened. Aiden, before Alan and I kind of share our thoughts on the showcase, before we get into anything else, like what were your kind of top level takeaways from the Switch 2 Direct?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really good. All I really want out of this is a better Switch. Like, I wasn't really looking for anything revolutionary. The Switch does so much of what I like in a game console. And so
Right.
I wasn't, looking to be blown away by hardware stuff. I wanted to see the games, and the games that they showed off were really great. And, my number one thing was I just wanted 4K support. I was worried because of Nintendo that
Yeah.
might not happen. My
Yeah.
TV is just that I have a 4K TV. It's fabulous for 4K content. Its internal scaler for like 1080p content's just not good. And so I don't like playing regular Switch games on it. I just want the Switch to output old Switch games in like a 4K container. Like, not even like upscale them to 4K resolution, just scale on the console, output it at
Yeah.
4K. And I think that, is pretty realistic. Even like not playing the upgraded games that they announced, which I think is pretty cool as well. But like, I just want to be able to hopefully pop a cart in my Switch, have it do all the scaling, and have those games just look better
Has
on
that been
virtual
confirmed?
shit.
Like, do we know that it's actually going to do that though?
We don't know. But I
Mhm.
think that I'm hopeful. More hopeful than I was before the direct. So
Yeah.
that's sort of my niche, like, dream for the Switch 2, and I feel like we're a little bit closer to having that confirmed. But we'll see. I can't imagine it would spit out a 1080p signal.
Unless you buy the upgraded version.
Well, then you
Oh,
definitely
I
have
can
to.
imagine it.
I mean, it's Nintendo. For sure, we could imagine it. But, it having built-in 4K support, I think, is a good sign.
Yeah.
and like 120 hertz support and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think that I think a lot of people were surprised that they went a little bit further, maybe than we were expecting it to. Like, it had ray tracing
Yeah,
support, like built-in HDR on the portable screen. Even if it's not good HDR, it's still like you don't expect Nintendo to like take those extra steps.
right.
Uh, so I'm hopeful that there's maybe a few of those little perks that I'm not used to getting from Nintendo hardware.
Yeah, it was interesting kind of recapping the technical aspect to be like, okay, because leading up to it, right, there were a lot of people who were like, "Ah, Nintendo doesn't care. They're not going to put 4K in there. They're going to tell you like you can take your HDR and take a hike. Like you're gonna buy our console to play Mario and Zelda, and you're gonna like it." Um, so to see, those elements, to see the 4K, to see the 120 uh 120 hertz and all that other good stuff. It was like, oh, okay, cool. Like they're actually thinking about these things. And it was interesting afterwards too. I think there were a couple articles that were like they were trying to clarify and like really pin down some of those technical elements. And you can tell like the spokesperson wasn't fully comfortable with like touting it, right? Because like this is weird for Nintendo to be like, yes, we have ray tracing. It was very general and vague, like, yeah, in cases where ray tracing is supported, there will be ray tracing, and in other cases there won't be, and that's up to the developer and blah blah blah. So, um, but yeah, I think overall pleasantly surprised that those things are there, and unlike the Bluetooth example from the original Switch, where it's like, oh, we'll have the functionality and then we'll just kind of flip it on when we're ready for it. I think they are kind of front loading. Hey, here are things that the Switch 2 can do, uh, in sort of like this suite of tools, basically for the developers to utilize, and kind of opening that door early. So I thought that was good to see. But Alan, what were your thoughts?
So for me, kind of like in a vacuum without really, talking about price or anything yet, it was a really good direct. Like the games that we really wanted to be there were there. Like we saw Metroid Prime, it looked way better than it did like in the direct like the week prior was like the Switch 1 version.
Hmm.
Um and Mario Kart Mario Kart World was there. A lot of third party support, like seeing Elden Ring right off the bat was cool. That new from software that's like Switch 2 exclusive, even if it's for like the first year or whatever, it's still like it's a Switch 2 exclusive, which is crazy. The Dusk Bloods, I think it was called. Uh,
Yeah.
and also like Aiden mentioned, like we had our last podcast and we talked about like what we wanted to see. Like our dreams are like, oh man, if they give us 4K 60 and 1440p and 1080p, that'd be awesome. And like they did it. I was that completely shocked me, especially the 1080p 120 FPS. It really surprised me. The HDR support. So basically, I was like, "Is this really Nintendo? Did they get kidnapped?" But like, it was so cool that I feel like Nvidia just rolled up to Nintendo HQ and it's just like, "Nah, man, this just comes with the chip. Like, it'll be more if we take it out."
Right.
And I'm really
Yeah.
glad that Nvidia took the wheel on this one because I think that if Nintendo like left to its own devices, none of that stuff would have been there. So yeah, so like it's really cool to see the hardware, especially like the ray tracing and DLSS, all that stuff kind of confirmed. Great sort of launch lineup, and yeah, I think that like it was as good as I could have hoped for. Really, the that direct.
Following up sort of what on Alan was saying, I think that there's some like Nintendo has always marketed themselves sort of as a family friendly or like a really accessible option within the gaming space and not competed on like specs, right? And features. They
Hmm.
competed on games. I think though that they're reaching a point where it's like they don't really have that anymore. They can't we'll get into price later, but they can't really market the Switch to kids. It's too expensive. And the Switch or the Steam Deck came out and sort of reset the space for what being a handheld gaming device means. And I think that the fact that they're not just like accepting these features on the console, but mildly sort of advertising them as a selling point is sort of acknowledgement that maybe their market or their position within the market needs to change and update with the times a little bit more than they have previously.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that um, it was interesting to see their well, the obviously the pricing conversation definitely kind of took hold uh of the discourse pretty rapidly after the showcase was over, right? Like in the treehouse stream that followed, everybody was like, lower the price, and there was a lot of frustration around that. And this goes back to, you know, when Alan and I were talking about this on our last episode. It was just the two of us, and I was hoping for a 3.99 price point, right? Because, and I think a lot of people were in that space because, to your point, Aidan, right? Like not only have been the family friendly um, company in the sense of the software, right, and the IPs that are more approachable, like with Mario and Zelda and etc., but also in terms of pricing. Like the original Switch came out at 2.99, which, of course, that's a whole different universe now compared to the one that we are in now. But still, you know, hoping for that 3.99 price point wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility for Nintendo because of, you know, their reputation, because of that strategy essentially. And so, you know, they came out and they were like, nope, 449 and then 499 with Mario Kart World. And even then I was like, okay, cool, like Mario Kart World will be, you know, $50 when you buy it, you know, bundled, or, you know, the usual like $60 otherwise. And then and then we started getting into the pricing. And so um it is interesting to see the departure, well, not the departure necessarily, but like how their reputation as like a family friendly or approachable or more approachable like console and company has been impacted by the direct on a couple of fronts, mainly from the pricing perspective, right? um yeah, and then I mean the From Software, I mean the Duskbloods title pull was quite a shock, I will say. Like, having an exclusive From Software title on Nintendo is not on my bingo card. So uh, that was definitely really interesting to see, and it does make me it makes me curious about what From Software's strategy is going to be, you know, with Sony and the other consoles as well. But for them to say like, hey, no, like this is going to be something just for Nintendo, that was a pleasant surprise,
A
I would say.
Miyazaki game too, like, not
Yeah,
sort of like something
not just from Software, yeah.
overseen and worked on by the B team, like, it's Miyazaki's next game.
Yeah,
Launching, like, as a Switch exclusive is pretty surprising, and comes back to the idea, I think, that Nintendo is recognizing that they're targeting, like, existing, like, video game fans and older video game fans as much as they're targeting younger ones. Like, I watched the whole direct with my kids,
sure,
who are, like, 10 and 6, and they were really excited for Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong and the Survival Kids reboot. But they didn't need to know the price because that's something
sure.
for me, dad, to figure out,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They
You
wanted
worry
to know
about that.
when they could get the
Exactly.
games. So,
Yeah,
June, we got that. And in some ways, like, not having the price was like a way to, like, not distract from the games for, like, that core audience.
right,
Because people like me were gonna get the information anyway. And so you have this sort of wild mix of, like, games that are clearly in Nintendo's wheelhouse, getting kids excited, but then also, like, just like the mic drop of having Elden Ring on there and then Miyazaki's next game is something that really signals a shift in the way that they're going to position themselves as, like, a place where you can play all the, your favorite games, not just your favorite
right.
Nintendo games, not just like, like the easy place, but, an all sort of all in one system where you can, you can get a wide variety and a wide range of games, not tackling Steam Deck entirely, but probably getting pretty close, I think.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, Alan, too, in terms of Nvidia, it's interesting because when we were getting the early indicators on the power of the Switch too, based on the chipset, right? They were saying like, okay, like it'll be like a PS4 Pro, based on this chipset. I think it does really speak to like the technology and the ability for Nvidia to like really uh, make their chips more efficient and like operate at a higher level, kind of like overclocking or whatever, that it seems to be performing even beyond that, right? Like just
Oh
because
yeah. That's way
we
beyond a
initially
PS4 Pro.
yeah, exactly. So like we got this idea and we're like, okay, this chipset, equals PS4 Pro, right? But that's not the case, right? Like as we've seen with like it's not just okay because it has similar characteristics to that in the PS4 Pro, or these key metrics means that it's aligned with a PS4 Pro in terms of horsepower. That, as we saw, does not necessarily equal that is its ceiling, right? Like it just means that that's sort of the core processing power that you have to work with, that you can then kind of expand, and you can do a lot more with these other features that NVIDIA has built into their chips. So I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
think
also
it's like
really promising. Yeah.
Nvidia going all out, because like all of the PC handheld is basically just dominated by AMD, and I think like Intel has MSI, like the Claw.
Hmm.
So like across the board, it's just those two companies. Nvidia's nowhere to be found, and same in the consoles, home consoles. There's no Nvidia there. Like this is their chance to go. Okay, no, like we have something that is capable, and I'm sure that chip will make its way to probably tablets and other things, or maybe even like an updated Nvidia Shield. I think it'll be interesting to see how soon we get like a Switch Lite type situation, because like
Mm,
Aiden was saying, this is sort of more for like older gamers our age, or like all those crop of kids who have grew up with the OG Switch, but now as probably teenagers are like, oh no, we want something different. We don't want the same Switch that we got when we were kids. So I think that with it being more expensive, that's as Aiden said, like they're just targeting that group more. So I am interested to see how soon we get the Switch, and then how they end up getting that price lower. I'm guessing is that it'll be like a less performant version of like that chip by Nvidia.
hmm. Maybe. Yeah, it'd be interesting. Or if it doesn't have the dock, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
if
yeah. And like
then
the
it
original
wouldn't do the
Switch Lite,
full
I'm sure
thing.
it'll be like the it's like one unit. You don't take the controllers off, and probably a lesser display, probably no HDR, stuff like
Hmm.
that. So I am interested to see like how soon we get a Switch Lite, and what that Switch Lite will like look like and operate like.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so let's go just really quickly on the software side of things. Right. So we got Mario Kart World. Looks pretty awesome. Got people really excited about it. A lot of Dry Bones fans very upset, rising up because Dry Bones is no longer on the roster. But the cow from Moo Moo Meadows is now taking the spotlight. So that was kind of fun. Um, and then another interesting one, Silk Song, just showing up in the freaking montage clip. Um, so that was fun, a sort of like lightning bolt to the chest sort of moment for Silk Song fans. Um, and and then Donkey Kong, right? Like those were kind of like and then of course we already talked a little bit about Death Splits, but Donkey Kong kind of standing out as well. Not a 3D Mario, but again, another kind of beloved IP, and one that frankly hasn't gotten as much attention or development as the others. So yeah, I think all of those definitely are turning some heads. I mean, which one, Aiden, was Miyazaki's Duskbloods the one that kind of got you the most interested, or was there another title there that you were like, okay, yeah, like this is what I'm really looking forward to playing on my Switch too?
I mean, Dust Bloods was the one that surprised me and stood out the most, just from like not expecting that, and interesting in terms of like where, like just looking at Nintendo's place in the market. But I'm like a Nintendo sicko at heart, so all of the Nintendo stuff was like right up my alley. Like Donkey Kong really surprised me. I'd heard rumors that there was going to be a Donkey Kong. I
Hmm.
don't, I wasn't really looking forward to it, or honestly all that interested in the idea of a new Donkey Kong. But the fact that it came out and it's not, modeled off any of the Donkey Kongs of the past, and it's like so deep down the like, uh, you know, destructibility. Uh, Sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's so far down like the destructibility style of gameplay, like you're kind of shaping the world around you, using the resources of the world around you. Like that's just pretty cool. And it has like such a deep sense of humor to it that really worked for me, and got my kids excited.
Yeah.
The big one for me is Metroid Prime 4 though. Like that looks incredible. And like notably for me, I think Alan's right. Like, it looked so much better than the initial reveal at the Nintendo Switch Direct, not that long ago, and
Right.
that really surprised me.
Yeah.
I like that it just looks like Metroid Prime. Like, Metroid Prime, the original, the first one, is such a classic game that just works so well. The remaster came out a couple of years ago, and it was just still perfect. It's still, like, such a fantastic experience. And the fact that they didn't recognize it, they didn't need to, like, reinvent the wheel. They just needed to do that really well again. I think has me feeling really positive about where Metroid Prime 4 is gonna go after not really liking Prime 2 and Prime 3.
Mm.
So that was, like, for me personally, the standout was Prime 4.
And the mouse support on that, just
Yeah.
that was cool.
Well, and, like, impressions afterwards, like, the mouse support is another thing I just didn't care about. But impressions of the mouse controls and, like, the way that you can use the Joy-Con as a mouse have been really strong from, reporters who have been messing around with the system, which really surprises me. So all of a sudden, I'm like, "Oh, okay, maybe there's something there. Maybe, like, this is something that can add to that experience and separate the Switch from something like the Steam Deck." Because the idea of playing, you know, PC style games on a portable device has always been interesting to me, but there are so many there that I want to play with a mouse, that I don't want to play with a trackpad or whatever or a joystick. And so if
Yeah.
Nintendo can kind of separate themselves and become like the place to play Baldur's Gate 3 with like mouse style controls, like that's pretty
Ah,
Civilization.
compelling to me.
what was that?
Civilization's another big one.
Yeah, Civ
Yeah.
7,
Oh,
like,
yeah,
with
Civ.
mouse
Yeah.
controls and stuff, and, like, again, like, when they first revealed that or when people were first speculating, I was like, "Oh, that's not gonna be fun." Like, I had a mouse on my SNES, it wasn't good. But the fact that everybody seems really impressed with the technology, with the hardware, has me all of a sudden thinking about, like, "Okay, how could you utilize this in sort of a living room couch gaming environment to introduce new styles of games or improved experiences to people who are predominantly console players?"
Yeah. Um, I'm also really interested in the mouse controls. Like you said, Aiden, I think it's been a pleasant surprise for a lot of the folks who've been reviewing it. Is because Nintendo is always known for their gimmicks, right? Like that's kind of like what sets them apart. Back with the Wii and Wii U and all this other stuff. Like they've they've been experimenting in the hardware space and not necessarily on the bleeding edge of hardware in the sense of like high end graphics, but in the sense of having a controller that interacts with the motion sensor and like doing all that other stuff, and the Wii U, and kind of the prototype of the Switch design and all that other good stuff. And I feel like this is another instance of that, right, where they're kind of incorporating their next test or their next experiment alongside a tried and true hardware form factor, which is the Switch 2 handheld. And they're like, okay, now click out the Joy-Con, and now it's a mouse. Let's see how they like it, right? Like let's see how it goes. And yeah, I think people are going to it is going to, I think, pivot, if it works well, right? It is going to pivot maybe how the handheld market approaches things like that, maybe to the point where a future Steam Deck, or the Xbox handheld held, or whatever the next iteration of like the Portal, or whatever, right? To try and incorporate more of that, you know click and point and click and mouse utilization. It's possible, right, that they can kind of point the industry in that direction.
I mean, like Lenovo tried with the Legion Go, like it
Right.
has basically Joy Cons, and they don't got the sauce. They're not Nintendo, and they suck, and no one likes them. And they're like, all it does is makes it feel flimsy. Just make a one whole unit, right? Like the whole body just be singular. Stop messing with it.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure some people will try, but like again, like it's very different from like Nintendo, who's been doing handhelds for most of their history.
Yeah. Um, so we got the hardware, got some pleasant surprises there. Software list looks solid. And I thought that was a really great point you brought up, Aiden, where it's like they didn't tell you any of the prices because that's for the adults to worry about, not the kids who might be like, oh yeah, new Donkey Kong. And then yes, the price wasn't in the actual direct itself, but then came shortly afterwards. 449
I nailed it.
standalone. You nailed it. You nailed it. I was hoping for the 99, but you nailed it on that. I nailed it on the release date. I said early June. Well, I said by the end of June, but really I was kind of thinking like early June. and so point for both of us there.
We could both still be wrong.
We could both still be wrong. Who knows? But so that came out. But really, the head turners, right, was the software pricing. So the bundled Mario Kart World switched to $4.99. Mario Kart World all by itself, 80 of God's own US dollars in the year 2025. And
How does that translate to Canadian, Aiden? What's the MSRP up there?
Mm, $80. I'm not sure what the MSRP is up here, but we've been, yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, but I've been paying $100, $110 for a game for a while now.
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, so let me check what the actual MSRP is on Switch 2 games. But if there's a new release game, if I go into, I bought Assassin's Creed Shadows a week ago, and I walk out and it's $108 after tax or whatever. So like breaking, it's obviously a bummer. We can talk at length about increasing video game prices while the industry is experiencing huge profits and major layoffs, maybe on another episode or something. But that Canadians have already been paying that $100 after tax rate, and so I don't know that it feels quite as significant of a jump to me.
yeah, yeah. It's 110.
I don't like it
It looks
any
like,
more than before. It's how much?
yeah, 110 looks like. So
110.
like 110 base, like before any VAT or taxes or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's and again, we also don't, or at least part of the conversation is that Canada isn't at present mired in trade wars with multiple other countries at the moment. So I mean, yeah, there's all the business happening with the U.S., but there might be opportunities for better trade agreements with Japan, with China, which ultimately can result in better pricing. But the the $80 price point for that, and then I think it was $70 for Donkey Kong, right? So that was another thing too, was that it seemed like some of the core software had varying prices. Instead of just being like, okay, $60 for everything, or even $70 for everything, right? No, they just went straight to 80. And yeah, so it was just really interesting to see that decision, right? That they wouldn't necessarily stick to a singular price point. And then also got people's feathers ruffled, the pack-in game. What was it called? Explore the Switch or whatever. Like they wanted to,
Yeah.
they wanted to charge for that too. So
No,
like,
they are going to charge. Not that they want to. They will.
yeah. And so the that was also something that kind of got people up in arms, because they were drawing comparisons between Astrobot for the PS5, um, and yeah, just again, just kind of another very odd decision when it came to the pricing. And so was it got the conversation definitely going in a major way for Nintendo fans and gamers in general. And yeah, I think I'm honestly surprised. I still am very surprised, honestly, with the pricing. Not of the console itself. Because if they came out and they were like, okay, the console's $450, sorry, gang, $499 if you bundle in Mario Kart World, but the games are still 60 or $64.99, right? Like there's still like some of that there, and you're like, okay, yeah, it's inflation, whatever. But they just did straight up like an Olympic long jump on the pricing. And now,
And I think
you
we can
know,
all
yeah,
intuitively recognize too that if we end up paying 450 instead of 400 for the console US, that's 50 extra bucks. Kind of sucks, but whatever, it's a one-time fee. But this increased cost of games, cumulatively, that's going to add up
oh yeah,
significantly over the lifespan of this game console.
Especially because Nintendo never puts their
Never,
games on sale.
yeah, yeah, they'll put them on sale, once a year or whatever. You'll get a Zelda sale, and Zelda will be 15% off or whatever. And then so it'll
yeah.
be, it'll come down to regular price at this point.
Yeah. I saw a really interesting thread. I think it was on Blue Sky, because oftentimes when conversation around the price of games comes up, people always point back to those old Toys R Us ads from when we were youngins, and be like, "Well, remember buying Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo for $85, or or $79 or whatever?"
Yeah, but those had
Um,
like a full on PCB and like custom chips and stuff in them too, which is what you know. These are just
yeah,
flash cards that we're buying now, and
yeah,
like everything of
exactly.
it's digital as well on top of that, right? Um,
Yeah,
and yeah, it's wild. And one of the other things too, like Nintendo's selling a Japanese language only console in Japan for like $330. So it
Yeah, that's
also
a
kind of makes
big
you wonder
difference.
how much like profit they're baking into these. If they can sell them at that rate, you have to think that that's the probably what it would have launched at if everything hadn't gone sideways in the West.
sure.
Maybe we would have been looking at 350. They said today that the the cost wasn't impacted by the US tariffs, but like if they're selling a Japanese language model in Japan for 330 and it's $450 in the United States, like that's a huge gap. They're not taking a
Yeah,
loss on those Japanese only models.
yeah,
It's Nintendo. Like they almost never take a loss on their consoles. So like
right.
where is the answer there?
Yeah. Yeah, man, I would have been pleased as punch if they released a US for 349. I would have been over the moon. You kidding me? Oh, man. But anyways, I was saying, finish my thought earlier. So there was a Blue Sky thread, and they were pointing to, like these old, ads where the games are more expensive. And somebody brought up, like, you know, well, one, like to your point, Aiden, right? Like those games were much more complex to develop, build, roll out, etc. Like there was just more cost in developing and rolling out those physical games. And now we have the digital option. But also like games weren't selling like gangbusters like they are now, right? The pre-owned and like used game market was massive back then, right? Like you didn't necessarily have the same drive to like get a brand new game for like $80. The rich kid in your neighborhood got the game for $80, and then y'all passed it around, right? Like, or same thing with, and then it calmed down when it got to the PlayStation era a bit. Um, and that's just, kind of how it went, right? So I do think that's something really, and this is part of the reason why I am like so fiercely analog is like, when you have an analog game, you can still derive value from the secondhand market. You can, trade it in, you can do whatever you want with it, but like you still have some inherent value versus moving to a digital market. It's like you're not preserving any of that value, right? And the companies certainly aren't giving you any breaks because they're not having to package it in plastic and ship it and everything else. Like it's the same price. Like so I don't know. It's really interesting to look at, how the pricing of these games really is, all things considered, like it is going up considerably, and there isn't really much of an impetus for, or at least there's more of an impetus for them to incentivize digital collections if that's where the industry wants to go. And we're not really seeing that yet.
Yeah, and for the physical copy part of the discussion, can we talk about how ugly that box art is? Because that box art is ugly on those games.
Oh yeah, on the like the ones that they're advertising for right now, like for the Mario Kart World and everything else, Nintendo.
Yeah, like the huge red stripe. It gave me the same energy as that ugly patch they put on the Seattle Mariners uniform, and then also the games that have like, I don't know, like 3 paragraphs worth of text at the bottom, because basically a lot of the Nintendo Switch 2 editions are basically to be like on the card itself, the Switch 1 edition along, but like the card itself will then unlock and get you like the update to make it like the Nintendo Switch 2 version. And like that's why they have a bunch of text on there to like tell you about that.
Yeah, yeah.
I just think
And
it's
also,
interesting.
how are you feeling about a lot of these games are just those key cards? Like they don't have like the full game on the card itself.
Yeah. I mean, I'll get to that in a second, but Aiden, I think you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna say I like the ugly boxes. I think video game boxes have been ugly forever, and I
No,
think time is
Aiden.
getting ugly. But I do think it's funny because the Switch 2 logo is like basically a square ratio logo with its word mark and its icon, but they have it in a big horizontal bar at the top, and it just doesn't it doesn't work, and it's just such a like from an aesthetic design perspective, it's just so strange to me that they would market the boxes in that way without having, like I don't know, more art and not having that big strip at the top, or doing the strip down the side and having the square logo in the top left corner or whatever. It's just a really strange choice to then
Yeah,
have like a horizontal strip across the top.
yeah. When I said like the box art is ugly, that's what I mean. That huge red strip, and then like the wall of text at the bottom, where it's like you can barely appreciate the art in a lot of these because of all that junk on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom box is so good.
Yeah,
It's got like a novel's worth of text at the bottom. It's so good, and a QR code.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with the Switch in general, I feel like I've had that disappointment of like spending $60 on the cartridge and then opening it up and like, this has been happening over time, right? Generally, and I think all of us can kind of relate to the sadness that is the lack of good meaty video game guides these days, and like booklets that you can open and flip through and get introduced to the protagonist and all the cast of characters and controls and everything else, like all those things that would keep you entertained in the back seat of the car or whatever when you were on your way home from getting the game at Toys R Us or whatever. And so now you spend $60 on Tears of the Kingdom or whatever, and you open it up and it's just a cartridge, right? It's just a cart. um but even still, like having that cart, right, like being able to then take it, play it, and then when you're done with it, be able to sell it to somebody else and move on. So um yeah, I mean, I can't say that I'm feeling any particular way about the the more recent version of the cards, although the sharing is pretty handy. Like if you're on a local network, right, and somebody has the game and you want to do like local kind of land, not land, but like local parties, that you can share one cartridge with multiple people. That is a pretty handy feature, and I like seeing kind of like some focus on that.
oh, they definitely did that to like soften the blow of like the $80 game, especially for like households
Yeah,
with like 2 or 3 or 4 kids.
sure. Oh yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah, well, in a household with 2 or 3 or 4 kids, like I don't know, Aiden, like you pitch in here as a dad, like you're not buying 2 copies anyway. It's like you have one Switch for the house, right?
Yeah, no, and I mean that was a thing this weekend. Like both of my kids, like we watched the direct, and they
Yeah,
were both excited for the new like Kirby and the Forgotten Land
yeah.
Switch 2 version. And so they both wanted to play Kirby all weekend, but we only have one Switch. And so they were
Uh,
just having to juggle. Like I'm not going out and I mean I'm definitely not buying two Switch 2s, but I'm not buying a second copy of a game. Like the kids can kind of figure that out, or Nintendo builds a lot of multiplayer options even into their single player focused games like Kirby, and they can figure that out too. So I mean all of my kids' friends, like if they have a video game console, it's a Switch, and I imagine it's going to be the same with the Switch too. And so the
yeah,
idea that like one of my kids' friends could come over with their Switch too and play multiplayer or play the new game, try it out on their Switch without having to have a second cart, have a second copy of the game, they can just play multiplayer across multiple Switches. Like that's a pretty big selling point, and I think that's something that the first time you do it is going to feel really good and be really eye opening for people.
right. Yeah, that's great. Um, so we got the pricing, got a lot of discourse around it. I think Nintendo is kind of sticking their ground, and then we had something pretty unprecedented that happened shortly afterwards, which was, Donald Trump announced on Liberation Day that tariffs are
How
going to be
liberated are you
applied.
feeling, Jeremy?
My 401k has been liberated of quite a bit of money actually at this point. Um, but that's neither here nor there. So Donald Trump announced the tariffs, and you know, the market just absolutely took a plunge. People pointed out uh, it would be humorous if it wasn't so sad that really the tariff calculations appeared to come directly from ChatGPT. Um, if you ask ChatGPT like how to quote like balance, trade deficits or whatever, like that's literally the formula that it gives you. Um, and and then Nintendo had to come out and be like, hey, so we weren't planning on the tariffs to be that bad. So we need some time to figure out what we're going to do. And release date's still good to go, but pre-orders have been officially delayed. So I, I had registered interest right through Nintendo, and also it was interesting to see how they're mitigating scalpers, right? So through Nintendo directly, you can register interest, and you would only be invited to pre-order the Switch too if you had maintained a membership for like I think at least 2 years. Like a total of 2 years, and that you have logged like 50 hours of game time, in the last 12 months or something like that. So that was kind of cool to see, and I'm like, hey, I meet both of those criteria, and so I'm hoping that means that I have a better chance. So I registered my interest, but then yeah, they came out and were like, nope, just kidding. We're not going to worry about pre-orders right now. We're still planning on releasing on June 5th, but we got to figure it out. And so, um, Aiden, I'm curious, like, what's your theory on what comes next? Do you think, because these are my two theories. One, they reduce the allotment, right? So they keep the price the same, but the allotment for the US will be down significantly, which would further drive demand and scarcity and make it potentially even harder for people to get their hands on a Switch in the US. Or are we looking at a price increase, or do you think there's a third option?
No, I think option one is probably the most realistic situation here. I don't think Nintendo's going to come out and all of a sudden, like when they've been getting so much criticism already for the price, they're not going to come out and announce a higher price. I think that, like, there's no appetite for that.
Right. Especially if they can
They
release a
shouldn't
Japanese
and
version for
can't really
330.
sell. Like, if they're raising the price and there's a tariff and there's an economic recession, they're not selling like Switch consoles anyway, right? They
Mm-hmm.
can't just price their way into profitability in the situation. So I think they're looking at allotments. There's going to be, like there's low number of volume, and if they can sell those and make a better profit or lose less money in other countries, they're going to do that first. And I think they're probably like everybody trying to ride this out, hoping they can just sort of ride this out, and then in 6 months or a year or maybe tomorrow, the tariffs come off and they can kind of resume business as normal in the United States. So I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of hit the is it June 9th release date?
June
Um
5th. June
June
5th.
5th
Yeah.
release date. Um in the States with just very limited quantity. And then that's going to go to the people who are willing to pay, you know, a ton for a Switch 2. And other countries are going to kind of benefit from that just by having easier access to it. And so, as a Canadian, we've been watching Trump talk about tariffs on and off since he was inaugurated. He'll threaten them, and they'll go on for 24 hours, and then he'll have a phone call, and they'll come off, and then he'll threaten them again, and then he puts them on everybody, and then he tariffs penguins. And like, there is just so much volatility there that a company that is so, small c conservative in the way that they do business, like Nintendo, they're going to take the most risk averse option possible, and they're not going to all of a sudden try to sell like if they had to bump the Switch 2 up to $700 US,
Right.
and then they sell a bunch of those, and then all of a sudden the tariffs come off, and they're like, "Oh, just kidding, we can sell it for 450 now." Like, we're in a situation there where they'd have a lot of egg on their face, and they'd have a lot of angry consumers who had paid really high prices for it. And that's just such a, like, awful situation for a company to be in, that I think they'll just look to other markets and see if they can just ride out what's happening in the States as much as possible. I can't see them putting the price up anymore. It just seems crazy. Like
Yeah.
they just can't sell it for more than that.
Yeah.
You know, and like
Yeah.
I think the tariffs will just make, you know, it would be one thing if they felt like they had to bump it up by $25, but like the tariffs, if you responded to the tariff math with like reciprocal price increases on the Switch, it would be ludicrously expensive.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
like there's no way that they can counteract
Like
that with
PS3, like PS3 launch era, like kind of ridiculousness, right?
like
Like,
just insane stuff, right? Like you know, Neo Geo games. Like that, you know,
yeah,
that's the kind of stuff we'd be looking at, right?
yeah.
And you just can't price bump your way out of this. And so I expect that they're going to take a different tack. Really curious to see in 2 days what happens for pre-orders here in Canada. It sounds like they're still on. It
Oh,
feels like, you
really?
know,
In Canada, they're still on.
yeah, in Canada they're still on from what I can tell. And so, you know, I
Pre-order one for
registered my interest.
me.
I,
Just
you
kidding.
know, but we were joking, you know, before we started recording that, like, you know, is there going to be a bootleg, like, you know, run on Canadian Switches?
Right.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Like, how are they going to kind of protect that supply from a lot of Americans? You know, trying to order that. You know, we had in Canada, we've constantly had issues with prescription medication that Americans
Mm,
will buy out, and like we need it. We need that stuff for ourselves, but it's cheaper here, and so then you have Americans buying it for cheaper prices and stuff like that. You know, we can't also have that happening with the Switch. It's like prescriptions is worse than a consumer device like the Switch, but I'm curious to see how Nintendo combats that and how Canadian businesses combat that as well in the next
yeah.
couple of days.
Yeah.
So like
Uh,
I wonder because like as you're all saying, like to take that into account, that those kind of tariffs, which by the way, like he's just like, oh, how about another 50% on China? Like he could easily do that to Vietnam or any other country. I wonder if Nintendo could basically say, oh yeah, they're just gonna make a run on Canadian Switches. So like why not just give them United States allotment to Canada and then they'll just import it and then they can't be mad at us for raising the price. Like just cancel the launch here in the US. Like
oh
because
no.
as you
No.
said, it's impossible. You don't know. Is he gonna put more tariffs tomorrow? Will he remove them? Will he double them? Will he have them? Will he then go 0% tariff? A negative tariff where they're paying us to give them switches? Like that's insane. And like Nintendo is so risk averse and they don't like losing money on hardware ever. So like why would you do that when you have a limited amount of switches that always happens when a new thing comes out, right? They can only make so many. So why not just ship them out to a bunch of other regions that you actually know what's going to happen?
Yeah. I don't. I think I'm still in the allotment territory. I do agree. Like the volatility in the White House makes business very difficult to do across the board, right? Like it's very difficult to conduct business as normal when, and we talked about this last time Aidan was on, I think, or our very first episode, right? Like it's very difficult to do business as usual when you're not sure if the executive branch is going to basically wake up one morning and be like, I've decided to make this country's life extremely difficult for no reason at all, except to maybe try and score some points with some billionaire donors of mine who want to be able to get into that country. And so I'm going to, make things painful until we negotiate them being able to build a factory out there and, pay people $2 a day to build iPhones or whatever. Like that is the, that's what makes it so difficult, like that volatility. But also, I do think that, presidents come and go, economic policies come and go. And so, like to Aiden's point, I feel like there's somewhere in the middle where Nintendo's like, okay, this is what we're going to do to help like kind of mitigate this impact. And an allotment is the way to do that. And if that means that, they sell 5 million, or 10 million or whatever it is, like 10 million units for the Switch 2 in the US. And then they're like, well, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's it. That's what we got for you. Or just like really small allotments, that come in like 10, 50,000, unit drops afterwards, to really kind of drive up the demand. I think that makes more sense, right? And then to ship it to other
But
countries
why
where
would you want
they
to
are going
drive
to
the
move this
demand
quicker.
when you're never going to be able to meet it?
Well, no, I mean,
And
like,
you'd be eating the
yeah,
cost, because if you keep it at 450, like, the whole reason that they delayed is because they're like, holy crap, we did not see that coming.
but I
So
mean, they're selling a
the price
330.
is going up no matter what.
I know they're selling, but to Aiden's earlier point, right? They're selling a Japanese only Switch for 330 in Japan, right? So like, and they don't take a loss on that, right? They historically wouldn't. So that tells you that if they're making money on a $330 unit, then they're making a ton of money on a $450 unit, even with the tariffs, right? Like, I feel like there's room
I'm
there.
pretty
So
sure
like
the tariff
their
applied
margin is
based
coming down.
on the MSRP of the thing, not whatever the build of materials is on the device.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the thing, like the cost to sell it, the cost of the money that they're making on it. I feel like if they are selling it for 330 USD converted, right? And they are making, and they say that's worthwhile, that's a good price in that country, then again, I don't think they would take a loss on it. So that means that there's more room for them, you have to account for shipping and current tariffs and everything else, right? So I'm just saying, like, I feel like the allotment is the better way to go. I definitely don't think they would pull out of launching altogether. I think potentially we could see a $50 bump. Potentially, I could see a $499, $549. I don't see them going much higher than that, because that would get into kind of ridiculous territory in terms of pricing, and I think it would be really hard for people to justify that on top of the software costs. So my
So it'd
first
be
guess is
interesting to
allotment.
know.
Second guess is $50 bump. Third guess is any sort of drastic scale down in terms of rollout in
It
general.
would be interesting to know, like in Japan, like how much of a margin they have, because like when you look at what the Switch 2 is delivering, like the 450 legitimately felt fair. Like I didn't feel like it was overpriced for the performance it's delivering.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
wish you knew how much it literally did cost versus how much you're selling in Japan. Because I've been seeing, a lot of stuff on Blue Sky about, oh, it works a little bit differently. It's not like a straight conversion. And they do try to sell the console closer to like cost over there, uh because I think the weakness of the Japanese yen and how, basically the amount of money people make versus what they do outside of Japan and stuff like that. So they try to take that into consideration for that specific market. But I still think that like 425 was like or excuse me, for the 450 was probably like a little bit of cushion with tariff, and then obviously shipping and all the other stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so like also like we're just in an unhinged, unprecedented times. So I'm just throwing it out there, like, yo, what if they're like, you know what, we can't mess with you guys anymore. We're just this allotment
If
that's in the
Nintendo cancels
Pacific.
the Switch, yeah, if
This
they cancel
allotment
the
that's in
Switch,
the Pacific, it's going to Vancouver, not Los Angeles port. You know what I mean?
there would be an uprising. I feel like that would be it. The Nintendo gamers would lead us to the promised land. Um, no, yeah, we'll see how it plays out. But all in all, I think, um, the we live in a world where the Switch 2 is presumably coming out. The pricing was not what we necessarily were expecting, but there was a lot more surprise on the software side than the hardware side, or the console side. And time will tell how the console pricing shakes out, right? Like whether it's an allotment issue or pricing adjustment or whatever. Um, but yeah, I think to Aiden's earlier point, if they increase the price because of tariffs and then they get rolled back and they're like, just kidding, we'll go back to the originally announced prices, like that would be quite, like that would be uncharacteristic of Nintendo to do that, right? They are usually very
I mean, now they
resolute
could
in their decisions as a company. Yeah.
they could honestly, they could make it right. They're just like, hey, you know what? That was a whole weird situation when you bought that $700 Switch 2. That was, like we did the best that we could in that situation. How about we hook you up with, a couple of games, right? Give them a couple of like first party big Mario. Give them like two, right?
We're sorry we charged you $700 for the Switch 2. Here's Tears of the Kingdom remastered.
I mean, they did that,
Yeah.
Please forgive.
right? Like they did that with
Yeah.
3DS. And I
Yeah.
think they did something similar on Wii U. Didn't they give away Wii U games at one point?
I
Because it
think
was
so.
not
Like,
doing well.
Yeah.
So there is precedent for that stuff. So much of this is just outside of Nintendo's control. Like this is just like awful timing that you cannot strategically business around. And I just don't know that there are any really good options in front of them. Everything is just gonna look bad.
and like everyone knows what's happening, right? Like everyone know that it's the tariffs driving this. Like to the point where here in the U.S., I know that I heard some car dealerships are going to be like literally like, here's what we wanted to sell it to you for. Now here's what the tariff tax on you is. Like, don't be mad at us, please. We didn't do this part. So I think that I think that would be. I think a reasonable decision of like, yo, this is what it is post tariff. That's what it's going to cost. If there's they get rid of them, we can sell it for the plain 450. We'll hook you up with a year of NSO, expansion pack plus. You get, the GameCubes, all that other stuff, and here's like one or two like big first party titles as a thank you for supporting us at the launch.
Yeah.
I think like one important thing to come out of this was Nintendo's like very specifically using language that targeted and highlighted the tariffs as responsible for like the cancellation of the pre-orders like in the US.
Yeah.
And I think we need businesses to very specifically link those two things together so that average people start to understand that there is a direct link between the Trump administration tariffs and the increased cost of living or their inability to access the things that they want.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fun conversation. Again, we will see how things shake out with the eventual inevitable switch to launch and pricing. But Aidan, thank you so much again for joining and being part of this conversation. Appreciate your insights as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Until next time, I'm Jeremy.
I'm Alan.
May your save point never be too far away. See you next time, everybody.
See ya.